curious if you're the non-drunk people who actually stayed up. Okay, good. Because usually that's always the problem when you have the first panel the morning after the party is getting people to come in. So I really appreciate that you're all here on time and bright and early. That is a good thing for us because we get to have a great conversation about fascinating decentralized storage and cloud and all kinds of good stuff that we're going to get into. My name is Ethan Pierce, and I'm going to let us start off by just having my rock star panelists give a quick kind of name, company, what they do, just to give you context as to why they are going to be speaking about this topic with us. So to start that off, Sebastian, I'll let you start.
Hi everyone, I'm Sebastian from Impossible Cloud Network. What we do is build a decentralized AWS, but actually much more than that. We call it the first permissionless, composable, and truly open cloud. We allow anyone to contribute to this ecosystem with enterprise-grade hardware, services that are at least as performant as traditional cloud, and what we call hypernodes to ensure the network's integrity. We started with a single service, an S3 storage solution, which is why I'm sitting here today as well, with the vision, of course, to become multi-service. We already have close to 5 million annual recurring revenue. It's quite nicely growing. Yeah, looking forward to this panel.
Thanks, Sebastian. Vishnu?
Hi, folks. My name is Vishnu Korde. I'm the CEO of dCloud Labs, and we've been built something called Stack AI and also Skynet. So you've got two products of ours. The reason I'm here is pretty much because of cloud computing, the decentralized cloud computing systems, and again, Stack AI is that foundational compute network for AI agents, and hopefully we'll see this thing unfold in our discussions today. That how we basically are trying to look at cloud decentralized future of ours with internet, being able to connect a lot of servers, decentralized networks of compute, storage, all of that, and hopefully build a brighter future for all of us together.
Thank you. Navjit?
Hi, my name is Dr. Navjit Dhaliwal. I'm the CEO and founder of Iagon. We're founded from Norway. We recently moved to UAE. And what we're building is basically in a high-level Airbnb for storage and compute. So we connect the idle storage and idle compute with users that need it. And we've been founded in 2017, so we've been working a long time. And recently we've gained a lot of traction in Europe. Recently signed an MVP with Worth Group out of Europe, which is a Fortune 500 out of Europe. And we also have a pilot with a Fortune 50 that should be announced sometime this month. So we're excited to be here, and excited to represent Iagon. And let's get forward to the DePin topic.
Awesome. Well, the subtopic is the future of data sovereignty, and so I'd like us to maybe just define that and get your perspective to start the rest of our conversation. Before I do that, though, who here is actually based in the EU? I'm expecting most of you are European, but this is an international crowd. So who here is based in the EU? Okay. Well, who here is based in the US? Is that a few? Oh, well, cool. So you might not have heard this topic a lot, but in the EU, it's very important, cloud and data and AI sovereignty, because we don't want the Americans and the Chinese to run everything. I'm an American. I'm allowed to say half that, so it's okay. But the point is, this is a very important subject in the context of making sure that this is a shared topic, especially as we see things move forward with the power of AI and how that's going to consolidate so much of how business powers itself, how the stuff runs. And so we don't necessarily want to have another Google, AWS, Microsoft kind of thing at the top of that, as well as we need to be careful of Xiaomi and Huawei and everybody else getting into this and being on the other side of that. So to that point, sovereignty matters in Europe. What matters everywhere, but there's a word we discuss a lot in Europe. Maybe, Sebastian, just your thoughts, also maybe from the Swiss perspective, on top of the EU version of it as well, because there's even maybe a layer there that we can add in on what does this concept mean to you and why is it important?
Right. So maybe let's start from the top. Data sovereignty. What does it mean, right? So it offers the opportunity or the idea that regulators can keep data within a certain region or a country according to the requirements that they define. Now, if it gets a bit more complicated if you have cross-border or cross-region service providers, right? So you mentioned the Americans already. Even in the EU, a lot of people use AWS, or not people, but businesses mostly use AWS or similar big tech providers, which are based in the US, as we all know. And there's a thing called the Cloud Act, which essentially, I'm not going to bore you with the details, but essentially allows them to, in certain circumstances, to be the owner of the data after all, that it's created here in the EU, right? So that being said, it's like politics aside, like it or not, I think that from the outset, that's not a great idea, yeah? Why you allow a certain entity or a country to be the owner of that data that technically is yours, right? Who is the owner of the data? At the end of the day, it's the person or business that's created it. And that it should be that way, period. I think that what decentralized cloud here comes in is it's basically taking that part out of the equation, right? Why does that matter? So if you think of regulators, the one thing that they can do when people step out of this equation or the idea of this concept is they punish them, right? They give them a fee, something like that. It actually happened quite often. We're not always aware of it, but there's huge fines, like in the billions, being paid already. And it's not always that they care so much, yeah? So the question is, what do we have out of Europe, out of Switzerland, as a weapon in our arsenal to basically say, okay, how do we counteract that beyond fees that they don't care about? We can provide our own infrastructure, right? We can provide our own cloud services. And that's why I think, like, also where our motivation comes from, decentralized services are just foundationally set up in a way that essentially is the evolution of all of this. It's the logical next step, in my opinion. And that's what also keeps me in this industry. I think it's just set up in a way that allows data to fundamentally be treated in a way that acknowledges data sovereignty true to its core.
So let me start off with, let me ask Donald Trump to come and watch this recording, I guess.
Yeah, so that is a layer to this conversation. Sovereignty has taken on maybe another even layer of importance with the new administration in the U.S. because it appears to be even more important to be protecting people's data and maybe having non-American powers in AI and well, especially around AI, but also just around everything around cloud and AI infrastructure, not just in the compute side, but just the whole infrastructure stack, making sure that's not all American. But yeah.
So basically, when we talk about data sovereignty, right, I think there are two reasons majorly, I mean, amongst many, why one wants to have a decentralized compute infrastructure network, right? One is because of lack of trust in how the data is managed across the world, right? Let's say your data center in the US, can the Europeans trust the US companies to really adhere to the same standard they would expect out of Europeans and the data of the Europeans, right? So that's one aspect of it, that's the trust. And that thing actually goes around the other way as well. Like California has got its own data governance policies, which even kind of dictates them that data shouldn't even leave California, right? I think this is going to happen more and more because every city, every country, every state, they have their own, they are liberal in a lot of ways, and you know, they always assume, or there is lack of trust amongst each other as well, right? So that's the first reason. The second reason is primarily around opportunities, right? So, like I think you know, Sebastian just mentioned earlier, is that all these larger companies are pretty much run and organized by larger organizations, enterprises in the US, AWS, you know, Google, Azure, Microsoft. They all are pretty much based in the US. And I don't know what the number is, but it's pretty high, significant, like 60-70% is actually owned by, computers owned by them, the US, and the rest is coming up from China and other parts of the world, right? Europe and other Southeast Asia, they're trying to come up with more solutions, but it's not there yet, right? Again, that's a lack of opportunity, which actually not a lack of, but it's probably rather people are not able to really put themselves in a position where their data centers, compute network are going to be more utilized. And I think that's where, you know, where I think all of our efforts here is to enable that network or systems where there's more trust in the system. That means if you put your data in any of these decentralized cloud networks, you're able to protect it, and also giving anyone in the world the opportunity to harness capital from their idle compute storage. Like, Navjit, I think, was talking about earlier, like Airbnb for compute, right? That's pretty much, I think, all of us are trying to do here, right? Including, I'm sure, Impossible Cloud Finance, Impossible Cloud, we had Stack AI, and all of them. So I think that's the interesting bit, is that how do you kind of solve for the opportunities and also reducing or increasing trust, right? Other than the sideline just would be that how do we kind of reduce the cost, right? Because these costs are actually very expensive. A lot of the decentralized cloud services, we are like about 70 or 80% cheaper than AWS and others, right? So it also reduces cost. So I think it benefits everybody as a humanity to be more productive with the same resources we have today. And hopefully, this will only scales up, multiplies, and and helps everyone to grow faster together.
So, Navjit, I want your opinion on just the data sovereignty in general, but also we can take it, because of the explanation we already have now, into this idea of, so sovereignty is easy in terms of a concept when we talk about centralization, because it's obvious that the data centers, if we have AWS, which data center we're spinning up in which region around the world, so it's obviously in the US, or it's obviously wherever the data center is. Once we add the word decentralization to that, we kind of open up a bigger Pandora's box around the whole concept, because we do have a sovereignty question, but now this decentralization piece maybe makes it more complex to understand exactly how this is working, because it's not clearly isolated in one specific zone. Thoughts on the sovereignty issue in general, and then we can kind of maybe dive into that idea, because I know from a regulatory perspective that's interesting, and then we'll swing that back around. Sebastian, if you want to chime in on that decentralized piece of that.
Yeah, sure. In terms of sovereignty, in my opinion, how I got into this space is from the healthcare sector. So in healthcare in general, you care a lot about patient data privacy and data protection. And when you talk about sovereignty, it's something like it's to you, it's private to you, sensitive to you. So in centralized solutions like AWS and cloud, you have multiple servers across the world, and you can geolocate them in a specific region, but it comes down to who has control of that specific data, right? So when you actually want to access your data, you are going through this middleman, AWS, and Google or whatever, to access your data. But at any whim, they can also, if they choose to, access your data. And there have been examples of that in the past, where they can actually read specific data, and they do it indirectly. And obviously the new AI, machine learning algorithms, they also in turn kind of read your data. So a lot of people talk about data sovereignty, but it's hard to understand what it means, because we put all of our data digitally across a lot of platforms, and we really don't care about what we're actually giving out to these companies. And these companies, why they're free in the first place, like X, like all these social medias, is because they collect that data and they use it for their own purpose, own revenue stream. And what DePin allows, cloud infrastructure, allows you to get rid of the middleman, basically giving you full access, full control of your own data. And that's powerful in my opinion, because when you go to that level where the data processor and the data controller are the user itself, then you give full access to the user to do whatever they want, to revoke access, to delete data wherever it's stored. And that is for me, is more sovereign than any other centralized solution out there in the centralized world. So I think Sebastian made some good points earlier as well about that.
Just as a concept, because I do always want to be careful. So we're obviously talking about DePin, but if you don't know what that stands for, it's decentralized physical infrastructure. So the idea is there are a lot of technologies that are allowing us to distribute that computing or storage power into, for example, the phone in your pocket is a supercomputer at this point. Your refrigerator could be, the amount of just computing power and storage that's sitting out there not doing anything most of the time. There's all kinds of ways that we're talking about how do we either build devices specifically to be a decentralized infrastructure, or how do we, with edge computing and other things, how do we use all of this latent stuff that's out there. So just that's what the DePin concept is. That's why this decentralization conversation is interesting because those devices will allow us to pull maybe some of having to use AWS, Amazon, or Microsoft, or Google. We can pull some of that from them because we're able to use all these other resources. And then, Sebastian, if you want to chime in, maybe one of you guys knows the statistic. I don't have a current number, but there's a certain point where about 65% of Ethereum was on AWS in terms of infrastructure. So you think it's decentralized because it's a whole bunch of people that are doing that, except it's still all in the hands of one company, even though they're not the ones actually micro-managing that.
So
A lot there to unpack.
I agree. I also see someone getting nervous over there. So maybe if
No, we're good. We've got 11 minutes.
11 minutes, perfect. All right. So maybe let me chime in on why DePin generally is important. Think of AWS, right? We've heard the name. So AWS wants to spend 100 billion this year on infrastructure. 100 billion, 100 US dollars. So that's a lot of money. And it's essentially impossible to compete with this as an entity, as a new entity. It just is, right? At this amount of money, it's insane. So DePin comes in here and provides an alternative. So I think the superpower of Web3 is bootstrapping supply, bootstrapping networks. Why? Because you can essentially subsidize to a certain degree whatever is not there on the utility side of the network yet. And combining this with the concept of the need for infrastructure, that's where DePin comes in, and that's why I think it clicks. It makes sense to me that that this could solve that challenge. Maybe a second point I want to make is AWS actually said that they cannot keep up with demand with their infrastructure in and of itself. Right? What they have right now, plus the investment, will not be able to match the demand that they have. Like, let that sink in, right? The 100 billion investment, and they still can't keep up with the demand. It's to me, it's insane. So again, here, DePin can come in. Why can't they keep up with the demand? Because their supply or the way that their architecture works is not able to accommodate the requirements for the building that infrastructure, right? So take power, for instance. It's just impossible to keep all of that power in one place. I think they have like 30-ish locations around the world. So scaling those further is just really, really difficult. Now, DePin comes in and says, okay, let's decentralize that. Let's make it way more distributed and use what's not necessarily in one location, but in several locations, which also gives you some nice advantages, such as edge performance. That was also mentioned already. So I think that's why I think like those two main reasons are why we are Impossible Cloud Network. We came up with this idea of saying, okay, let's not sacrifice on a cloud service angle, right? Let's serve according to traditional cloud requirements, but let's use Web3 power to accommodate that.
Yeah, and just to throw in the numbers, because you mentioned that number from Amazon Web Services, Tuesday, this was the AI Summit this week in France. It was a very big event around European stuff, but very much around what France is doing, and they announced 109 billion of investment into AI, specifically most of it's around infrastructure, but other things. And then just yesterday, the EU announced another 200 billion. So the EU is trying to throw its hat in here and keep up as well, but it is very much a race to buy the available processing power from like NVIDIA or wherever that we need to get the particular things from, but then also just have the ability to, for example, France positioning itself with nuclear power as a way to actually power these data centers that we need. So there's lots of things besides just the money that are constraints in this scale up of these things. So yeah, the AWS number is huge, and it's the same number as just Europe trying to do. So it's already something. Vishnu?
I mean, like, I think you touched upon some key points here, right? It's about the data centers being built around the world to essentially get as many GPUs as possible, right? There is a race to it. But there's one angle which we haven't really touched upon yet, and I think it's about what is the future like? You know, like DeepSeek literally dropped an AI model which uses 1/10 of the compute which which other usual models do, like whatever you see from coming from like OpenAI, models coming out from Meta, they are like 10 times more. Just think about it. It requires 10 times more compute, right? And I think the models are not developed yet. I'm sure the times to come, you will see models actually becoming more efficient that means they might actually require lesser compute than what has been required. But the bet which we are playing along with is that AI and intelligence will grow much faster than the reduction of or improving in efficiency, right? So you might see this growth even happening more. But then that actually is amazing because with hundreds of billions of dollars being invested in larger enterprises, by larger enterprises in data centers, this reduction of or improvement of the compute performances and which are required by these AI models might actually help decentralized networks. That means smaller machines, smaller devices like mobile phones which you have now would be able to support much larger models at and give you responses in a much fraction of a time, right? And also because it's going to be on the edge, it might actually be better. In fact, some of the efforts which Skynet is bringing in is trying to bring in that AI layer and using this DePin infrastructure to really make this thing more efficient, right? Again, Skynet is another product of ours. But then the point is that, does AI really care about compute? Literally, if you think of AI, which is going to be running most of the world, like instead of humans today, do they really care about data? They should, right? But then, are we really set up for that yet? Probably not as to the efficiency, right? So I think as time progresses, we will see this compute, so decentralized networks becoming more secure than what they are right now. And AI will be like, okay, you know what? It doesn't matter where it's running because it's all encrypted at all levels, and it's able to go plug in and start processing at these smaller devices which DePin is offering, and then also be able to kind of, even though you would have data centers, you definitely will have data centers with some a lot of compute, but then you'll also have these decentralized networks providing compute levels which are super encrypted. There would be no way to really decrypt any data out of it or get data out. Or misuse the data which has been sent there, but also use that same compute level for agents to run and operate.
So we've got just 5 minutes left for us to finish up the other 12 questions that we prepared. So just as a quick idea, Navjit, since we are talking about decentralization and how that is the whole point of why this becomes interesting, but from a regulatory compliance perspective, now we don't necessarily have one single zone in order to identify that this thing's there. So how do we stay compliant if we're on the side of the startup or the company, or how do we enforce compliance if we're on the other side of that? How does compliance happen in a decentralized cloud storage AI infrastructure?
Yeah, that's a great question. I guess I'm going to take an example of our own company, Iagon, here, and how we approach this and how we approach compliance. So GDPR, as you guys are probably aware of, a lot of people here from Europe, became relevant in 2018. And since we were founded around that time, we took that into consideration in terms of how we can specifically imply that on the Iagon infrastructure, on distributed infrastructure. So first and foremost is distributed infrastructure is all across the world. So Iagon, for example, has 572 nodes. Nodes are, let's say, machines that provide the idle capacity, either storage or compute, across the world. We have it across 52 countries. And thereby, for example, let's say if a user or enterprise user wants to store data in a specific region, we can allocate the shards or the tasks to that specific region. Obviously, compliance is much more than just that, not just about the geolocation of data, but how the data is managed, right? So this is a little bit different in terms of how it's managed compared to centralized infrastructure, where centralized infrastructure we have data processors, as I mentioned earlier, and data controllers, which are the middleman that control your data, right? And they have to obviously they have to follow certain regulations according to the jurisdiction that they're in. So how we bypass that, or not bypass, or how we comply with that, is we put the onus on the user to be compliant with their own data. So in this case, in Iagon's case, the data controller and the data processor are the user themselves. They choose which region to store the shards on, and they distribute, and they can combine the shards back to retrieve the file as well. So and data compliance is not going anywhere. So it's different when you think about data compliance, compliance in Web3, people talk about token compliance and utility and security and all that. Data compliance is much different. It's already out there, well defined in many countries, and each country has different sets of regulation. And through this architecture, we can comply with these regulations worldwide.
Excellent. So last 90 seconds, Sebastian, I know that the compliance thing was also a point you wanted to chime in on. So your closing thoughts for us, maybe around that subject.
Sure. Maybe I can touch upon a concept that where I think we talk about all of this compliance, this regulation, but at the end of the day, who is this coming from, right? It's partially the regulators, but at the end of the day, the business that is running the cloud services has the demand for that, right? I think what we shouldn't forget here is when we build this decentralized infrastructure, we should always have that business in mind, right? So that's where we started from, where we said, okay, there is a few decentralized cloud projects already out there, but I think what not all of them have mastered yet is the connection to that business, right? So you can't just simply bootstrap hardware and that's that, right? You need to think, okay, who is actually going to use this, right? So the price is usually an argument, but the second thing that comes in is that there is demands for availability, there is performance requirements, all these things on top of compliance, right? I think so. It's one puzzle piece in all of this, these demands from the customers, and with that in mind, I think that's that mantra you have to keep when you want to bootstrap your network. So like you can't just spin up hardware and expect somebody to use it. You actually need to think about, okay, who is actually going to use that? That's my closing thought on that one.
I appreciate it. That's fantastic. Well, please give a huge round of applause to my rockstar panelists. Thank you guys for taking the time.